Hey, everybody, welcome to the Blendr Report, where news meets rational thinking. I'm your host, Jonathan Harvey, and that is your co-host, Liam DeBoer. Liam, what are we talking about today?
Today, we're chatting about Carney and Trump's Oval Office meeting, Canada voting for economic collapse, whether we're entering an era where the productive members of society will withdraw, China using fentanyl as a form of chemical warfare, Canadian citizens facing taxation without representation, and Alberta separation now being more feared by Canadians than Quebec separation. All right, let's get started. All right, so first off, we've got the Great Canadian Gaslight. Carney praises Trump after campaign of fear. The Liberal campaign framed Mark Carney as Canada's protector from Donald Trump, casting Pierre Poilievre as a Trump loyalist. But after winning the election, Carney met Trump and praised him as a transformational president while avoiding confrontation over U.S. tariffs. Despite campaigning on severing close U.S.-Canada ties, Carney quietly yielded in the Oval Office. Meanwhile, state-backed media spun the meeting to portray Carney as defiant, contradicting reality. This hypocrisy underscores the Liberal Party's reliance on fear-mongering and media gaslighting. The real issue isn't Carney's diplomacy, it's the deceitful narrative that fueled the campaign and continues to mislead Canadians. So, how does Carney's actual interaction with Trump contradict his campaign messaging?
Well, I mean, we were told we were getting the new Bentley Continental GT, and we sort of got an '86 Ford Tempo. But look, you said this at the end of the article. The real issue isn't Carney's diplomacy; it's the deceitful narrative that fueled the campaign. Pardon me, it's the deceitful narrative that fueled the campaign and continues to mislead Canadians. I mean, we know there was no point of leverage with Trump, right? It's very simple. The liberals ran our economy into the ground, and now we're helpless in this sort of battle of economic warfare. What pisses me off is that the media and our politicians try to convince us that we have something to actually push back with. Like there is a fight here. Like we've got some leverage over the bad orange man. But the truth is we only have a long-term plan, which includes leveraging our natural resources, which the liberals refuse to do. So I guess the media better stay warm because this is only going to get worse.
Well, yeah. And to me, honestly, I didn't even think the meeting itself went that poorly. Again, Canada doesn't have any leverage in these scenarios. And I think when you don't have leverage and you try to play as if you do, you get into a Zelensky scenario where you end up getting humiliated and it's just like, no, just sit down, little man.
Yes.
So I don't think that Carney should have went in guns a-blazing into that. I think he actually did handle it pretty well. He even had, one good line and talked to Trump in his language about real estate that I thought was interesting, where he was like, sometimes Trump, like, as you know, in real estate, some certain areas or listings just aren't for sale, no matter what. There's just too much value on them that can't be put into monetary perspectives. But so I thought he handled that actually pretty solidly. But again, it just goes to the contrast of the manipulation that we saw throughout the last few months. And it's wild to me to even see now Liberal supporters being like, yeah, see, this was a masterclass by Carney. They call it tactical empathy is what they're calling it. And you're like, this is how you're dealing with a narcissist, and he's outmaneuvering them. It's 4D chess perfectly and all this kind of stuff. You're like, no, he ran. And to put this into perspective, during the campaign, Mark Carney at one point said, this is 1939, saying that we're on the brink of world war, and likening Trump to Hitler and himself to Churchill. So you can't drum up this fear, delusion, essentially mass psychosis that they've been doing with the elbows up campaign and all this kind of stuff. You can't be like, no, we need to fight dirty and we're going to war, and then immediately walk in and the first thing you say to him is be like, you're a transformational president, and you're putting your emphasis on the American worker is astonishing, and all of this kind of stuff. And it just goes to show that we're living in this era of doublethink where people, especially Canadians on large, can get manipulated for months and months on end and then just do a 180. And when the guy bends the knee that's been saying, I'm going to fight till death, essentially, then it's just like, oh, he's doing fucking bravo.
Yeah, it's just like this weird form of confirmation bias where you're just manipulating the story to suit your needs. And this is kind of what I was saying earlier. Again, we see this very much the same way. Carney can't believe that bullshit. Carney knows the situation. He doesn't sit there and go, oh yeah, I'm going to take this guy to the cleaners. Like, you know the situation you're in. Anybody who's deeply entrenched in this political game understands exactly where the chips are sitting, right? So I'm not upset with the way he managed the meeting necessarily, but it was the context with which he entered the room. Like you said, you walked in like he's going to handle this guy, and he's going to do this and that and whatever it's going to be, and he's going to fight for Canadians, and he just rolled over and took it. I just think strategically it was almost stupid for him. Like, try to get it off camera, try to get it away from the White House, try to do something else so that your facade is essentially not blown, but cover facade, you understand. But that just wasn't the case. That wasn't the case. So for me, look, I mean, for Canada, nothing really changes. We know there was no good short-term plan. We know that the Liberals are unwilling to leverage our natural resources currently to get us out of this mess long-term. We know that's the case. So this is just really, should be just a wake-up call to the Liberals. Instead, like you said, they're spinning the story to make themselves feel good about the whole situation. So again, I don't know what you do to convince people that, they're having the wool pulled over their eyes and this is maybe not the right party to lead the country, but here we are for another 4 years.
Right. And it just goes to show that even how effective that gaslighting campaign is by the Canadian media, which is, again, entirely government subsidized, because immediately after that meeting, they started printing headlines. Carney tells Trump, Canada is not for sale and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, yeah, you take this one sentence, even like I was highlighting about the real estate analogy, and then you blow that up as if that was what characterized the entire meeting, as if that was the tone that carried out throughout that conference. Whereas in reality, Carney talked for 3 minutes compared to Trump's like 29 minutes. It was almost like 10 to 1, which is fine. I don't think that he should have walked in there again, guns a-blazing, or trying to be like, this is my stage, get off of it. Like, that would have just ended very poorly for him. But it is just wild, again, to see that the Canadian media then takes this and just flips it on its head as if he walked in there chest puffed. And actually, even too, right, like a couple weeks before the election, Carney did make that claim that the old era of American and Canadian deepening integration within our economies and our military is over, is what he called it. Like, he said, that's done.
Yeah.
And the relationship as we know it is done. And then, dude, a day after that meeting, the Liberals and Mark Carney put out so that they had this like locked and loaded, because you can't turn around a video like that this quickly within a day. They took it and they were like, oh, Canada and America are better when we work together, and this is why Canada is upping its NATO spending and military alliance and all of deepening economic integration. We're better when we work together. You're like, again, it's just that's what bothers me the most, is just the complete hypocrisy and the fact that Canadians don't seem to pick up on it at all. The average Canadian, at least.
No, I mean, I agree. I think the reality is they're being told a story, and I think the media is continuing to keep that story alive so that they can try to maintain confidence and trust in themselves and in the Liberal Party. I think that's really what it comes down to. Because, like you said, it was all campaign tactics and nonsense. I think they're like, oh, if we position ourselves like this, we win the election. And you can't completely just be like, oh yeah, so that was bullshit, guys. I'm going to go actually deal with this the right way, or in a way that's somewhat diplomatic, so we can kind of try to navigate this trade war appropriately. Yeah, but don't worry about that, because then they lose all trust in the guy. Because, like you said, like, one of the largest, if not the biggest campaign issue, especially for the boomers, was how to deal with Trump. I'm like,
yeah.
So you can't now all of a sudden say, oh, that was completely insignificant. I just lied to you guys.
It wasn't even one of the largest. It was the largest by a significant margin.
Right,
so
right,
it was,
right, which
it was
is
like
crazy.
It was by like 10 or 20% that they favored that as the biggest issue of the election. But actually, even National Post just released something an article yesterday. Now, it was from an anonymous source that was within the campaign, so whoever, take it with a grain of salt. But essentially, they were saying that behind closed doors in the meeting, like months ago, I guess 2 months ago, when the election was called, that Carney told Trump in one of his first private calls with him that, like, hey, just a heads up, I'm gonna have to campaign aggressively against you, but like, don't like take it with a grain of salt, like saying like, don't worry about it too much. So apparently behind scenes, he was even telling Trump like, hey, I'm gonna take this hard stance against you, but just to let you know, like that don't put any weight on these words.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's a good lesson for society at large across the Western world. These politicians are all working together. We all know Carney and Trump are tied financially significantly. None of this is really what you're getting. You're getting the kayfabe situation. The Brett or Eric Weinstein. I forget whose theory it was. I think Brett's. This is the WWF, the WWE. Sorry, I watched wrestling when I was a kid. I'm not a loser. It's this thing where wrestling's not real. You still buy into it because you enjoy it, but you know it's not real. So that's the same thing that we're seeing in politics these days. We're being given like the WWE version. They're acting in front of us and then going about their business behind closed doors. This happens across the world. So even with Trump, like, and you saw this the other day with Bill Maher's meeting with him. Bill Maher had to say some things that were somewhat negative about Trump, but he said, really the guy's not that bad. Of course he's not. I'm sure most of these people aren't terrible in person. And the point is that this is all an act, and they're all acting together, and they're doing whatever they have to do to maintain the facade and keep the engine running the way it is. So it's just the way politics go. And I wish that people would be able to see through that, because I think once you do, you might actually focus on the issues and what the party might do for your country versus the bullshit nonsense that the Liberals have done over the last 10 years. And now through this campaign, they've convinced Canada they're the solution. So it's just one of those things that hopefully people can see through that.
Well, yeah, just to touch on those financial ties before we move on here. So, yeah, the main one is that Carney's Brookfield gave Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law, over $1 billion loan for a 99-year lease on a building that he owned in New York, and gave all the money up front rather than leasing it actually for that 99 years. And it was more or less, the whole thing was just to get Kushner out of a bad financial situation. So it was a big handout in that sense. So they've definitely got ties there. But then even too, you look at what Brookfield has done recently over the last few months. So they've now poured billions into U.S. manufacturing, helping companies like Intel expand their manufacturing in America. So Brookfield is financially betting on America to succeed, which is, obviously the company that Carney was chairing right before he ran for prime minister, and obviously has deep financial ties in still. And then also, the other one is that Brookfield just bought Colonial Pipeline for $9 billion in America, which is the largest pipeline in America. And then it's also just, again, this is the hypocrisy front, right? Where you've got Carney, who is this green energy crusader and says that the climate change needs to be at the heart of every single financial decision. And those who don't place it as their top value need to, or will face consequences, essentially, like being wiped off of the market. And then, again, Brookfield is pouring billions of dollars into American oil and gas while they support projects or policies at home in Canada for things like limiting Bill C-69, limiting oil pipelines here.
Yeah, it's complete hypocrisy. I mean, they're actually quite diversified into fossil fuels in many other parts of the world too. It's just what it is. Like you're being told one story, but the truth is over here. It's all misdirection, and you just see it exactly when he walks into the White House. It's like these guys are buddies. They work together. We are basically an inconvenience that provide tax.
All right, moving on to our next story. We've got Canada voted for economic collapse, incoming recession, record debt, and a falling loonie. Canada is on the brink of economic collapse, with Wells Fargo forecasting a recession and the loonie projected to drop to 67 cents USD by 2026. Despite record high tax revenues, Canada is deeper in debt than ever. Since 2015, the government has added over $625 billion in debt, while delivering ballooning deficits, reckless spending, and scandals like the $54 million ArriveCan app, which was supposed to cost only $80,000. Now, under Mark Carney, deficits are set to exceed 3% of GDP, and Canada's debt to GDP ratio surpasses 90%. With over 60% of Carney's spending projected to be capital costs, the Liberals aren't just spending, they're buying the economy outright, and Canadians are footing the bill. So, is the famous World Economic Forum slogan, "You'll own nothing and be happy," becoming a reality through economic policy?
Yeah, 100% it is, right? Like there's so many things that you can look at that sort of identify or highlight the fact that our government is it feels like purposely driving our country into the ground. How do you have a 1.4% GDP over 10 years cumulatively? That's insane. How do you increase the cost of living by 100% or more? How do you increase the cost of groceries by 300% or more? How do you increase the cost of homes by nearly 100%? Rent by 100%? Can't keep up with housing. Immigration's pouring in. You look at this and it's like, you know what you're doing. You know what you're doing to the economy. It's very evident. In fact, it's objective. So when you do stuff like that, you create a society that's far more dependent on the government. So that's step one. You create society that's dependent on the government. So you need handouts. You need to fall in line. You need to kind of do what you're told because if you're a dependent, you can be controlled. Then when it comes to this capex thing, this capital expense issue, this is actually important. So when you look at capital expenses versus operating expenses, the big difference is that capital expenses are expenses that are for assets you own or plan to acquire. So that's how you track capital expense versus an operating expense. So when our government's saying, "Hey, we are going to," so Carney doubled the capital expense spending as a percentage compared to Trudeau, which means twice they're gonna be owning twice as many of the assets in Canada. So when you think about that, you're like, okay, well, what are they investing into? And this kind of goes to your point about you'll own nothing and be happy. This is tens of billions of dollars into housing, green energy infrastructure, critical minerals, and even AI. So they're using your money to expand ownership and control over you. That's essentially what's happening right now. And it's literally that simple. So when people say, well, no, Jonathan, that it can't be, why would that be the case? You say, okay, but the accounting principle is that basic. You would not track it as a capital expense if you were not planning to own the asset. You would track it as operating expenses. That's what our government's done forever. It's very, very clear. It is literally that easy. And there is no mention of selling these assets. So it's not just some small accounting trick. Now, don't get me wrong. There is a potential that they eventually offload these assets. But if that's the case, then why even be in home ownership? Why even try to build an infrastructure to manage these things if you're not trying to expand your reach and expand your control? It doesn't make any sense. So for me, I see this as a big momentum shift rather, for Canada in the direction of you will own nothing and be happy. Now, I think for people that are not quite as tapped in as we are, you would look at what's happening today. You'd say, well, that's not the case, Jonathan. They don't own everything. You still have free will and all this other stuff. It's like, yeah, I understand that. But what I'm saying is this shift, this is the first move. So it's like the aggregation of marginal gains. If you increase something by 1% every day, over time, it makes a very significant difference. This is what we've done. We've shifted. We've gone like this. So now every day when they continue to add more and more and more to the government's balance sheet, which is exactly where these things are going to go, and he stated that himself, over time, over the next 5, 10, 20 years, now look at the trajectory. Now, when you look at that, your government may be the largest, when you look at that, the government may be your largest landlord in the next 10 years, especially if you can't afford to live in this country, which again was driven by economic policies implemented by our Liberal government. So when you look at it all together, you're going, this is really moving in the wrong direction. So yeah, you may own nothing and be happy. Now, yeah. I don't know how happy you'll be.
Yeah, and that's what's wild to me too, is you hear all of these people talk about, well, he's got a housing plan. And then it's like, do you understand what that plan is? Because, it's very much building off of the Trudeau idea. Actually, what was crazy is even CBC admitted it, that when Carney was campaigning, that the policies that he was supporting were actually they were what Trudeau was going to campaign on. So like it was very much picking up Trudeau's policy blueprint and just running with it under Carney. But we even saw Trudeau while he was still in office talking about using public lands for housing, right?
Yes.
Or turning this. But then even that capital costs stuff as well. To put it into perspective, when Trudeau was in office, capital costs were roughly 35% of government spending. So for assets, as you were mentioning. Now under Carney, it's over 64%. It's 64 point something percent of capital costs. So they're doubling the amount that they're trying to own as the government. And so you go, okay, that's going to be government owned housing on government land. Nobody's going to actually be able to own anything here. And that's what's so crazy to see this kind of meme come true in the sense, or another conspiracy theory, I guess, come true, right? But then also, too, I don't see how even fiscally this can go on for very long before this bomb just detonates. Because, okay, you look at, for instance, even Fitch warning that they are putting our credit rating at risk as a nation. So just like how individuals have credit ratings, which determines your ability to access capital. So if you have a poor credit rating, the bank's just going to say, no, you're a liability. I'm not giving you any money. Canada itself is in that position. So what's wild is how we've even hung on to our AA credit rating this long, because the average for a AA credit rating for debt to GDP ratio is 50.6%, and Canada's over 90.
Yeah, I was going to say we're almost closing in on 100. That's wild,
right? And so that it's just crazy that that's the gap that we're at. So we don't even necessarily deserve the credit rating that we have. But then even too, you look at this and you go, yeah, what you were talking about with the 1.5% GDP increase over the last 10 years, we're making the same amount of money when money itself is worth less now, and we're piling on more and more debt. Like, this is just a recipe for complete disaster. I don't see how it ends in any way other than completely bankrupting the nation.
Yeah, I mean, they only have a couple of economic levers, and I was having a conversation with a couple of guys about this the other day. There's two primary levers. One is to print more money, right? So this is like a macro version of increasing minimum wage. No matter what, it creates inflation and it devalues the dollar. So it doesn't work well, but it solves your problem. It's blowing hot air into the balloon that is going to burst anyway. And Carney's obviously shown that he's a fan of printing money. He was part of the decision making behind printing $700 billion while Trudeau was in office through COVID. So this is something they're definitely going to do. 100% they will. It'll devalue your assets on the global stage. It'll create a massive economic windfall of problems. But this is what they're going to do. The other thing they're going to do is they're going to find new ways to tax you. And the primary one that I'm seeing right now is the home equity tax, which is implementing a tax on your primary residence. Now, Carney was the one who masterminded this idea in 23, and they've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars doing research on this, which is crazy in and of itself. Just do it or don't do it. But all right, cool. So this leads me to believe it's like, well, you're creating this economic situation. You're trying to take more away from people. You want them to be dependent on the government. And you're continuing to basically dig the country further into debt with all this weird ideological strategy that you have for green energy. Okay, cool. So printing more money kills the currency. The only thing you have left, the big one you have left, is the home equity tax, which then takes more capital out of the hands of Canadians and citizens, making them more dependent on you. But this should be something that a lot of these boomers and a lot of people that have done well for themselves and exist in that top tax bracket. These are the guys you voted for. This is what they're going to do. And I find it frustrating that people were supporting the party that is going to implement this is the final nail in the coffin for Canadians, because in my opinion, because this is like the last way that families can sort of build some wealth. Mm-hmm. Unless you're quite successful and you know what you're doing, you're in the top 1%, 5%, whatever it is. Those people always do well. But it's everyone else that has, okay, if I get into home ownership though, I can roll this into some equity. It's a retirement fund. It's something for my kids, whatever it is. It's kind of the last way we have to build wealth for the average Canadian, and they're going to snatch that away. So this is kind of what we're in for, unfortunately.
Well, even that 2040 forecast report by our own government, Policy Horizons Canada, said that in the future, the only way that home ownership will be possible for Canadians, or is likely to be possible if we continue on the same trajectory, which it seems like we are, if not just accelerating that trajectory. But they claimed that the only way Canadians would be, especially young Canadians, would ever be able to own a home is if their parents left it to them, and that the only way to maintain their social status, essentially, whether it be and that their only way to maintain their social position economically will be through inheritance. And then you look at this and you go, oh yeah, they're also just trying to tax that. It's essentially a death tax before the death tax, like inheritance tax.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it's we're moving down the wrong direction very quickly. I'm not sure how we correct course. I think the individual, I think here's what I would say to give this a positive silver lining. The individual still has control. Mm-hmm. So for people that understand where the country's going and what's happening, you still have the option to pack up and leave. I'm currently in Texas. You can reorganize your life and liquidate assets so you're not stuck with them when they implement these taxes. If you can't, say, leave the country, you know what I mean? There are a lot of other options. It's a capital gains tax. So sell a place that you're going to have a lot of gains on. Like, let's say you've had your house for 20 years and, hey, you're going to make $1 million on it. Sell it. Buy another place that is going to maybe just maintain itself, because then at least your capital is safe because it's on the capital gains, not just the sale of the property. So there are some things you can do. But I think that sort of what I'm saying is knowledge is power and the individual still has control. So just make sure you know that and take control of the situation and do what's best for you.
Well, and just the last thing to kind of touch on here too is the Canadian loonie itself, right? With them predicting that by 2026 it'll be worth 67 cents to the US dollar. Well, just think about what that does, especially if you're buying internationally. If you're like, because again, we're not becoming more productive. We're not making more things here for Canadians to buy from other Canadians.
No.
So by weakening our dollar, we actually inherently make things that we import more expensive because we can't leverage our dollar as much. And what's crazy is, man, it was 10, 15 years ago that our dollar was on parity with the US dollar. Some people, I made a video about this actually, and some people said, well, that was due to the 2008 fallout of the financial crisis, and it was more because the US dollar was weakening that it became, that's not the case, because in 2000, roughly around this area, the dollar was 90 cents to the US dollar, and by 2007, so before that collapse ever even happened, or that house of cards came down, the US dollar reached parity, the Canadian dollar reached parity with the US dollar. And so even just our monetary system itself is falling apart, let alone the productivity aspect or the trading of goods and services. That is just a whole nother basket. But yeah, our money itself is becoming increasingly less valuable, which is another ticking time bomb.
Yeah, so much for that silver lining. Nice one.
Yeah, sorry, taking it apart.
Hey everyone, we hope you're enjoying this episode. If so, please consider leaving us a kind review wherever you're listening. If even just a quarter of our weekly audience did so, we'd instantly become one of the top-rated Canadian podcasts. We appreciate you helping us out, and now back to the show.
All right, moving on to our next story, we've got, who is John Galt? Is Canada in its Atlas Shrugged era? Canada is descending into recession, debt, and institutional decay, leading many to question why they should continue participating in a system that punishes success and rewards failure. Drawing stark parallels to Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged, the country is witnessing a real-time exodus of ambition where innovators and entrepreneurs are increasingly demoralized by excessive taxation, inflation, red tape, and crumbling public services. Despite massive increases in revenue, healthcare is failing and government waste abounds. As more productive Canadians consider opting out, the question becomes clear. What happens when the people who keep the lights on decide they've had enough? So what forms might a modern day strike of the productive class take in Canada?
Yeah, I think there's a few things, and you're seeing a lot of it already, right? First, I would say is mass emigration, which is exactly what you and I are looking at doing, which is why I'm down here, right? You're going to have the entrepreneurs, the high earners, the people that get it. They're going to leave. They're going to go somewhere where there's better taxation, better opportunity, just less economic leverage from government over citizen. I think it's going to be not only a brain drain, but it's going to shrink the tax base significantly because these are again the high earners. People, and this is funny because Carney does this one, the offshore. So, offshoring your wealth and your operations. We've seen globalization for a lot of years now. So people offshore operations all the time to save themselves some money. That's just going to grow. The problem is that's going to grow significantly, but that's the thing we need to fix. We need to get more more domestic manufacturing, but we're doing all the things to drive it out. So they're going to continue leaving. And then offshoring your money, like everybody that I know that's worth their salt is going to pardon me. Everybody that I know that's worth a reasonable amount of money, they all offshore their wealth somewhere else. Whether it's primarily Cayman Islands is the one that I get a lot, but there are a lot of other options out there, and people are just going to continue doing the same thing. Obviously, and I don't blame anybody. You're playing by the rules, right? Like people are like, well, you should put more money into the country. You shouldn't offshore your cash. It's like I'm actually a fan of what Carney's done. I don't like that he's done it while trying to tell us that we shouldn't do it and then try to run the Liberal Party. I don't agree with doing both of those things. I think that's hypocritical. But like the economic strategy is sound. This is why people do it. Because Canada has become so hard, such a harsh tax environment. You're going to have workforce disengagement where I think highly skilled professionals are going to start scaling back hours and retiring early. This is just not going to be worth it for them. And it's interesting. I think you're going to see this. This is a bit offshoot, but I think you're seeing this with the younger generation too. You get this feeling of like, well, why bother? So I think that's going to be significant. You're going to start seeing underground and parallel economy. So you're going to see cash economies, but you're also going to start seeing a big digital currency economy grow. In a lot of ways, I'm becoming really, really bullish on crypto again. Very much so on Bitcoin as kind of the foundation of it. I think a lot of the other stuff is a little volatile, but I think this is like a core component now to life, especially in Canada, because they've run the economy into the ground so deeply. And just listen to the last 15 minutes we talked about the previous topic. I think that crypto and Bitcoin specifically, I should say, I think this is going to be a big part of the parallel economy that's going to start to grow that the government has no control over whatsoever. They're really going to struggle to sort of get their hands in there. Sure, they can shut down certain platforms, but there is a really, really strong case to make that the decentralized currency is something governments don't have control over yet, enough of anyway, to stop us from using it. So I think that's going to scale up. I think you're going to see a capital strike. So I think you're going to see a lot of people, and maybe a capital strike is the wrong word. You're going to see a lot less capital running into the country. The reason I'm not calling it a strike necessarily is because they've already stopped. Pre-Trudeau, we were about par on the amount of money that was invested from Canada into the U.S. and then from U.S. into Canada. It's about the same. Now it's disproportionate. Now it's based on. If I read the trajectory properly, it is probably close to $1 trillion over the last 10 years, disproportionately invested from Canada into the U.S. No one's putting money in this country anymore. But why would you? There's nothing here that says there's going to be a positive yield on anything unless you're a political insider. It's really the only way, right? And what's interesting, while I've been driving around down here in Texas, there are a lot of retail businesses that have 5 to 10 units, but there's a ton of variety. There's a lot of different stuff, and obviously, if you have 5 to 10 units, you're doing pretty well. So you've got all this sort of retail option and a lot of retail opportunity down here, I should say rather. Reason that's significant is it shows some strength in the economy. Whereas in Canada, everything's basically big box stores. I mean, I was in Port Credit with restaurants, and I've seen some places that have been around for 20, 30 years now closing their doors because it's untenable there. And Port Credit is one of those areas that's like bulletproof. So I think you're going to see even more capital leave the country, something that the trend is already running. And finally, I think you're going to see a lot of civic disengagement. I think people are just going to lose interest because, how long can people like you and I fight? And I know you and I will because we're a unique case and we're the ones that are sort of providing a lot of the information. So I don't think maybe you and I would be the ones to slow down, but it's all the other people involved. How do you feel when you give everything all the effort you have and you continue following the democratic solution of contact your MPs, contact your senators, vote, blah, 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 do all these other things, and nothing ever happens, nothing changes? I am fully convinced that we are a one-party state right now in Canada. I don't think it's forever, but it could be for 20 to 40 years. Because there's no way the Liberal Party that just lit the country on fire in every facet should have possibly been reelected. It's insane. It's just it's absolutely bananas. All it tells me is that our political system is compromised. So that's my take. So, if you're on the outside looking in and feel like you can do even less than people like you and I can do, people are going to start disengaging, and I think it's going to happen at scale.
So one industry that you and I know very well is hospitality. As you mentioned, you owned a few restaurants. I used to manage restaurants and all this kind of stuff. But even that, okay, I would never walk back into a management position in a restaurant, getting salary that can then get taxed to fund a government that I view is completely hostile to me. This is also something that I've seen with other industries as well. Like I know I've got the chops that I could, not to say that I could walk in and just master any industry immediately, but put my 5 to 10 years of hard work in. I know that I could get into a high level position in pretty much any industry I choose.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
With the hard work. But I won't do that, because what I'm going to go work more to, like, let's say right now, if you take a hospitality job, you just take the average, say, bartender downtown Toronto that's making some good cash and tips or whatever, they can make in 3 days with, if they're working at the right place, they can make in 3 days post tax what the average person in Canada is making working 44 hours a week.
Yeah.
Like, what incentive would there ever be to move up the career chain in Canada if you're just going to work more and have more of that taken to land in the exact same place? And so, to your point, I think that's going to be a issue with a lot of people, is that they're just going to see this writing on the wall. Okay, why? There'll definitely still be enough people that fall into the trap, but okay, I'm going to go to school. I'm going to take on tens of thousands of dollars in debt that is going to take me 2, maybe 3 decades to pay off, and then get a job that I make 80 to 90K a year in, at least for the first 2 decades while I'm paying off those student loans, have most of that taken, only really end up walking away with $45,000 to maybe $50,000 after taxes. Like, what incentive is there to go into that blueprint? What incentive is there to, say, quote unquote, follow the rules of society if I'm just going to end up with a massive burden on my back? I don't see it. So I think you are going to get to this point. Like, again, I don't really advocate. I don't think I should tell people what decisions to make. A lot of people go, well, what can we do about this? To your point, I just want to give individuals information so that they can make informed decisions on their own. I don't think I should be the one coming up with those decisions, but I'm not going to break my back just to fund a government that hates me.
Yeah, I mean, look, here's how I would summarize what you're talking about. The Canadian dream is currently dead.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it is, right? There's nothing really here for us, and I think a lot of people are recognizing that. And that's kind of that list that I went through of what people are gonna do and what's happening. And I agree. I mean, I think that's a great analogy, because the restaurant analogy, that's been alive and well for a long time. Everybody kind of knows, like, you shift to management, you kind of start losing money right away. And the goal would be like, hey, okay, I'm going to manage for a couple of years, then I'm going to own my own place. I think I've done that. Not a good idea. The country makes it even worse for entrepreneurs than it does for the managers. So again, like you said, it really just, it's, your economy in your country is out of whack when climbing up the ladder is actually worse for you. So yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to see what happens, over the next few years, because I think the writing is on the wall for a lot of people. I really think this is interesting. I'm just kind of formulating this as we're talking about this, so bear with me. It may be a little janky. If you are looking at Canada holistically, you control the country. Let's call it the powers that be. I'm not trying to be too cryptic, but let's just call it that. So they say politicians are kind of like one bird, different wings kind of thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Same puppeteer, different puppets. Okay, so if you're the puppeteer and you're looking at the stability of the country and you're trying to control the country and you're trying to keep you have to try to keep your GDP up, you have to try to keep the engine running in some fashion. I think it would have been a much better idea to try to elect a conservative government for 4 years, to give people like you and I and a lot of other people that will now go the Atlas Shrugged route, to keep us engaged. Because I think that this was the one that just put the writing on the wall for everybody. I think that you are going to see a mass exodus. I think you're going to see, like, however many people left in the last 10 years, I think equally or more people will leave in the next 5. So it's I think this is going to be really, and don't get me wrong, they'll replace them with immigrants, which is to each their own. Do whatever you want to do, but like the high earning potential, the economic engine of Canada, and the identity of Canada, gone. So I think it's going to be interesting to watch. I don't really know necessarily what the fallout looks like. You know, we talked earlier about printing money and home equity taxes and all these other things. But yeah, I think it's going to be sort of a massacre of Canadian identity.
Well, and this is one of the main faults that a lot of these say, like, you know, you said powers that be. I think you can just call them the Laurentian elite, the power brokers in Toronto, Ottawa, and Montreal, these kind of power centers in Canada, the big financial players. Well, actually, it's even interesting because you did see even a lot of the Bay Street people turn around and endorse Poilievre. So they were kind of pushing for that. But what you're going to end up seeing is, with their mindset a lot of the time is that, say, immigration. You can, well, if people leave Canada, you can just replace them with immigrants. You know, you saw Trudeau on 2016 say that he was looking at refugees and saw the future of the Canadian economy. But the issue is that a lot of they really don't take the cultural aspect and the ancestral lineage into account that completely gets wiped off there. You can't just take people. People are not simply just economic inputs and nodes in a network that can be swapped out. So, for instance, even like farming and agriculture is a great example of this. When it comes down to like understanding the seasons, what crops are going to grow, all of this kind of stuff, the actual practice of farming, a lot of that is baked from generation to generation from childhood. Like, you know, I grew up in a very blue collar area. My family actually sells tractors and heavy equipment. So like we weren't farmers ourselves, but very intertwined with that group. And you see this when the farmers' kids and stuff, like they're out there learning how these farms work from the time that they're like 5 to 10, knowing that it's expected that they're going to take it over. If people like that leave Canada, you can't just take people from, say, Syria and put them into that and be like, okay, this is your land to farm now. That's not going to happen. It's mind-boggling that people think that expertise can just be picked up in a moment's notice.
No, I think that's a really good point. That's a good thing to highlight, because I think that when you look at replacing one with another, a lot of times people go, okay, well, the person had a cookie cutter job. They worked at a convenience store. It's a Walmart greeter. Shut up. That could be anybody. It's right. But the things that actually make Canada operate, the foundational components that help us actually even provide the food to be in Walmart, well, when we remove those people, now what happens? That's exactly where I think we're going, because like you said, it's back to the restaurant analogy. They're making it a lot harder for anybody to grow and survive and thrive in this country. So what are people going to do? They're going to get out of here, man.
All right, moving on to our next story. We've got Project Zero, China's covert chemical war on the West. Chinese dissident Wan Hongbing alleges that the Chinese Communist Party launched Project Zero, a covert campaign during Trump's presidency to destabilize the U.S. by flooding it with fentanyl precursors. Xi Jinping reportedly views the opioid crisis as revenge for the opium wars and evidence of Western decline. Despite U.S. pressure, China continues to fuel the epidemic by exporting chemicals to Mexican cartels. A 2024 U.S. congressional report reveals Beijing subsidizes and protects fentanyl traffickers. If Yan's claims are verified, this would constitute chemical warfare disguised as trade, deliberate state-sponsored destruction of American lives under the guise of economic activity. So, should China's actions be considered a form of chemical warfare under international law?
Yeah, I mean, if Yan Hongbing's allegations in the U.S. congressional report are accurate, I believe they would meet the threshold of chemical warfare under international law. You know, I think, you know, it's specifically because it's also state sponsored. You know what I mean, to cause mass harm. That's fully the intention here. It's not maybe a traditional chemical weapon rather, but it's being used to deliberately facilitate mass murder inside a country and to destabilize the United States. So I look at this and kind of go, I think you could interpret it as chemical warfare, but at the very minimum, it would constitute hostile covert action and therefore this is war, right?
Well, and two, even it's the number one killer of Americans aged, I think it was like 19 to mid 40s. I can't remember the top number there, but it was like, it's like your prime economic outputs essentially as a country, your workforce, they are the main target of this. And, going back to the opium wars, this is exactly what it was used by from Britain when they were shipping opium into China through India back in the 1800s. They were trying to weaken their economy so that they had more leverage over them, and also use that then leverage to pry open their markets and ports and give them access to all of that. And then Sam Cooper actually broke a crazy story, I think it was just this week, about an opioid bust being linked to a mass shooting. Did we talked about this privately. We never talked about it on the podcast, but that Danforth shooting, that's the one that you were mentioning you were really close by to, right? Had he taken a left, you would have been right there in a restaurant compared to...
Yeah, that was the mass shooting of the guy on Danforth. Yeah.
Right.
So we were having... It's so crazy. He got off at Pape Station, and then he headed west. If he had headed east, so basically what they said was he was looking for a crowd of people. We were 100 feet east of Pape. That's it. Mm-hmm. So if he had seen, and we had the windows open, there was a ton of people. It was our 1 year anniversary party at Nomads on Danforth. If he had decided to go left, we would have been the primary targets, and he would have been shooting fish in a barrel. We had a wide open window and a narrow corridor for a restaurant, and there was probably 60 people there. Wild.
So what's crazy is the media positioned that whole story as a mentally ill Pakistani immigrant that was just dealing with hardships, and therefore, like, they almost tried to spin it like as like we should have compassion for this story. And what Sam Cooper uncovered and wrote about was that there was, at this time, the DEA found links in American intelligence, found links between that shooter and a carfentanil bust in Canada, in Pickering, Ontario in 2017. So that shooting was 2018, I believe. And then the carfentanil, which is more deadly than fentanyl, was found in Pickering. And it was the shooter's brother was the one that got arrested in this bust for carfentanil. And that this was tied back to Chinese precursors as well as Pakistani gangs. And again, when you think about geopolitically as well, like China, right, is adversarial towards India, and Pakistan is adversarial towards India. And so these interests often overlap. And that's what we're seeing in Canada, especially as well. But when the DEA was trying to get samples from this carfentanil bust and say, hey, we think this is part of a larger network, this whole situation that you guys have going on here, I think this is part of an international network, the RCMP shut it down. And so in refused to cooperate with the DEA on all of this. And Donald, I think his name was Donald Im. Definitely his last name was Im, but he was a DEA officer, and he was reporting to Cooper that that mid-level, like, so your general RCMP staff was completely willing and cooperative, but it was the high-level brass that shut down this stuff. They were just like, no, don't get into it. Because you look at this, that narrative is, oh, okay, this shooting and this bust, these are just one-offs, and therefore, like, we don't need to look deeper into all of this. Whereas if they allowed the investigations, maybe what you find is that Canada has become a hub for international crime, and you see all of these networks globally operating within Canada, as we've uncovered deeply over the last couple months, or covered deeply, over the last couple months, is that, yeah, especially both, it's not just that things are going from Mexico up into the United States, but that also the money comes through here. And actually, too, it's funny, you take Mark Carney's position on, say, the Freedom Convoy. how did he say that we need to shut this down? What's the number one way to shut this down is go after the money. And that's exactly what they did. They started freezing bank accounts. They went after Give, Send, Go. They tried to take down the GoFundMe, or they did take down the GoFundMe. So they went after the money. And if you think about, okay, this international ring, then why wouldn't they be going after the money here? Well, I think there's definitely a lot of, say, overlap between these crime organizations and our law enforcement, our politicians, all of this kind of stuff. And they have a vested interest in shutting down, in hiding the fact that that fentanyl and all of this is being used as a form of chemical warfare, because they want to just make it seem like each one of these incidents are one-offs and therefore nothing bigger is happening at play.
Yeah, so do you think that's primarily because they're economically benefiting from it? And you and I both know that there's tens of billions of dollars of money being laundered through this country every year. It's a major industry, in fact. Do you think it's that? Do you think it's, maybe it's both, or do you think it's about maintaining diplomacy and sort of political relationships, or also maybe that there's so much leverage over a lot of these people? They're going, we kind of have to brush this under the rug here because we're in the pockets of, say, Xi Jinping in China. What do you think? What do you think the primary reason is, or do you think it's all of the above?
I think it's probably all of the above. I think different people are different, have different circumstances. So I think sometimes, just as we've seen, whether it's just if organized crime is just thought of as any other business on the planet, what do you see often corporations do, or people that are have a lot of wealth? Well, I'll get my family member to run for office. I'll get them into office, and then I've got essentially a collaborator within the office. I think that happens a lot. I also think there's the cartel move of I think it's called Porto or Plato, which means essentially silver or lead. So it's like, hey, we're offering you money or violence. You choose. Either you get in on this with us, or we're going to come after you physically. And I think what ends up, and then I also just think there's some people that are just completely for sale. Also, too, there's the blackmail operations as well. I think sometimes there's the whole useful idiots scenario where, let's say a cute woman walks up to you at a bar while you're a politician in Ottawa, and a cute woman walks up to you at a bar and starts hitting on you. You take her back to your hotel room, and then you find out later that girl was 17 and that she was actually just planted and put into that operation. And that now that somebody has this story on you that can end your career, maybe tear apart your family, and then they can just use that as leverage over you. Or even too, Sam Cooper covered how in the Markham underground casinos, because a lot of this money, this laundered money ends up finding itself into high-priced real estate. They turn those mansions and stuff into underground casinos, and then they'll invite politicians and high-profile figures into those casinos. Hey, come in! Like, here's $1,000 to gamble, play some blackjack with us. Again, then criminal things happen. I mean, even the fact that they're at an underground casino is
so
enough.
Stupid.
It's so stupid. And like this is like Compromat 101 type stuff. And just a heads up, like this is been how human nations operate forever. The Soviet Union and America were doing it to each other during the Cold War. We're now seeing it, especially with China in the West. I'm sure they're doing similar operations down in America, but they're definitely doing it to a very effective degree up here. And yeah, so even the Toronto police and CSIS both believe that, Canadian politicians have been compromised within these underground casinos. So I think it's just a mixture of a bunch of different things. And there's probably if you look at it, just if you're, say, the CIA, or if you're the United Front, or if you're Chinese intelligence, or any of these things, you go, I have 10 different playbooks I can run to get influence within their political system or their economic system. And then just depending on your mark, you go, this is the best strategy to run for this person.
Yeah,
so the play is different for everybody, but I think they all end up in the same place.
Interesting. Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's a strong assessment. Today's podcast is brought to you by The Tallowed Truth, the real secret to better skin. Most products aren't designed to heal your skin. They're designed to keep you buying more. More dryness? Use this moisturizer. Now you have redness? Add this toner. It's a never-ending cycle, but real skincare doesn't create dependency. It restores balance. And the best way to do that is to feed your skin what it actually needs. The truth is, you shouldn't put anything on your skin that you wouldn't put in your mouth. That's why I use F-Bomb from the Tallow Truth, made from grass-fed, grass-finished tallow with honey and frankincense. It's hormone-free, antibiotic-free, steroid-free, GMO-free, and vaccine-free, because I know that's important to a lot of you. And here's why we love them. They're a freedom-first brand that supports Blendr News and everything we stand for. And with a 30-day money-back guarantee, you've got nothing to lose. Try it today at thetallowtruth.com/blender and use code BLENDR, that's BLENDR, for 15% off all products, including bundles that are already discounted.
All right, moving on to our next story. We've got taxation without representation. Citizens billed roughly $563,000 per MP for 73 days of work. From October 3rd, 2024 to May 26, 2025, Canada's Parliament will not have sat for a single day, an 8-month blackout during which MPs still collected full taxpayer-funded salaries. This absence followed by the Green Slush Fund scandal, where massive conflicts of interest and financial misconduct through SDTC were exposed but never investigated. Instead of accountability, the government prioritized internal politics, Trudeau's resignation, a prorogation, and a federal election. By year's end, Parliament will have sat for just 73 days out of 455, only 16% of the time. Canadians are paying over $563,000 per MP for virtually no representation. This is not democracy, it's defiance. So what does this say about the health of Canadian democracy?
What democracy?
Yeah, exactly.
It's kind of where we're at, right? Look, when Parliament sits in only 16% of the time over 15 months, while MPs are collecting their full salaries and these scandals go uninvestigated, you have a government more focused on self-preservation than public service. And I think that's clear to a lot of people. And these objective measures have really, really highlighted, right? Democracy relies on representation, debate, and oversight. And when those things are absent, you don't have governance, you have a facade, right? Now, for all those who still believe our vote makes this a democracy, because I think that would be the argument. Well, we still get to vote, Jonathan. Okay, sure. So I would say that you're being fooled. I would say that we're being fooled. And I don't want to go too deep into conspiracy when I say that, but here's what I think. I've been saying this for a long time, and I've had this conversation before on the podcast. The empire needs to fall. This government needs to fall. The way that Western society works, for the most part, needs to fall, and we need to rebuild it. A lot of organizations, pretty much everything that has to do with a government organization. Just nix them all. Let's rebuild. Let's go like the route of Argentina. But we're not going to do that because in society, we don't have a strong mechanism to actually overthrow a government when it's time, like we used to 500 years ago, which was cut people's heads off. So, but because we don't cut people's heads off anymore, the government doesn't use violence to suppress or maintain or hold us accountable. So, in essence, it's not really part of our Overton window. So it's not really something we do either. They built a really, really good system. They learn from their mistakes in the past. I think they go, well, we use violence, we can control people. But they're like, wait a minute, if we can convince them that their vote matters, well, now we can control them forever. Because instead of us being able to use violence, and I'm not advocating for violence, I don't actually think that's the solution. I really don't. It's just an easy analogy. It's a good comparison to make. But because we can't do that, they're like, well, you guys can vote yourself out of the situation. And as we said earlier, same puppeteer, different puppets, same bird, different wings kind of thing. A lot of political parties are being controlled by, like you said, Laurentian elites. And it's like this all over the world. But this kind of gets to my point. We are told that we can vote ourselves out of a situation. But when they've got leaders that are all part of the institutional democracy, which is to maintain the organization above us that doesn't actually allow us to do what we want, we don't really have a choice. Democracy doesn't really work. Yes, you get to vote for somebody, but they're going to do the same things, and none of them are good for you. And right when you think you might have a leader that can make a difference, somehow, even after burning the country to the ground for 10 years, somehow they still get their guy implemented into place. So I'm of the mind that we don't really have much of a democracy anymore. Sure, for the reasons you mentioned above, but also the foundation, the structure, the framework of what we are working with here that we're told is democracy is critically fractured, in my opinion.
Yeah, and the funniest thing for me, again, even going back to our first conversation about how Carney did a complete 180, went against everything he campaigned on, and yet their supporters just clap and applaud and say this is a masterclass in excellence. The same thing it's funny. I noticed the exact same thing here. Like right before we hopped onto this, I noticed one of the one of the top comments in my notifications on social media was about how, well, MPs have greater responsibilities than just sitting in Parliament. They were pushing back against this video I did on this topic, as if I shouldn't be taking issue with the fact that Parliament hasn't sat in nearly 8 months. And
how do you justify that?
Right. And while they're saying, well, they have responsibilities outside of Parliament. First of all, their job title is member of Parliament. Like, so if there's no Parliament, what is their job even?
What are you a member of?
And then second, so they were trying to make the case, well, they're supposed to be boots on the ground, representing their people, hearing the concerns of these people. Well, again, without the ability to take those concerns and bring them to Parliament, where supposedly action is supposed to happen on it, then essentially these are just like therapy sessions.
Yeah, you're screaming into the void.
I hear that you can't avoid a home. I hear that, crime is taking over your neighborhood, and like, we're here for you. Yeah. But like, well, I can't do anything about it because there's no Parliament for me to do anything about it. But
vote for me again. I'm going to fix all these problems. Okay.
But that's like, again, this is the level of brainwashing that we're dealing with that you're talking about as well. Is if I can convince you that the system is operating as it needs to be, then there's no issue at all for me, and I can just do whatever the hell I want. And this is where we're in now what is called 5th and 6th generation warfare, which is essentially informational warfare, right? That, well, if I can just create this false reality for you to live in, then I don't actually even need to use violence, because you'll do whatever I want you to do. It's the same thing with, like, I mean, we even see it in foreign policy and this kind of stuff. America's been doing this, and China does it here, and all of this kind of stuff with our social justice movements, and America does it with social justice. Funny, social justice movements always become the attack vector for these essentially rent-a-riots, as Mike Benz calls them. But okay, if I want to control a nation or overthrow a government, I don't actually need to go in and storm them militarily. I just need to propagandize their citizens into fighting for the thing that I want them to fight for. I don't even need to do it. I just need to get your people to do it for me. And I think this is exactly what is happening in a large scale when it comes to this informational warfare. And, this is actually even something, this is one of the reasons that I've kind of taken issue with democracy in general, like even the concept of it, is because, like, I don't believe even... I think things have gotten really bad, and in all that exists is an illusion of democracy now. However, even 15, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, I would have never characterized it as the Canadian people have control over their government, and the government is accountable to their people. And this is one of the biggest illusions that I have an issue with in democracy, where you go, no, it creates this false reality where people think that their government is accountable to them. And that idea in and of itself is extremely dangerous, because if you think these people have guardrails on them, then you're willing to give them a lot more leeway. Whereas if you live in a system where, let's say, and I'm not even advocating for this, I'm not even saying that I want to do away with democracy because I have a better system. I'm just saying I see some major flaws in this one, where at least in, say, a monarchy or something of that nature, people are willing to admit that they're in an adversarial relationship. They don't think that monarchy answers to them. They go, yeah, they at least understand the direction of power properly.
Yeah, I mean, I understand. I actually agree. I think that's a good designation to make. When you are led to believe that your government works for you, and that there are guardrails in place, you are not only willing to give them more power, but you again believe that your vote will make the difference, and that now, because your team won, that these people are on your side. It is. Again, I'm with you. I'm not advocating for any alternative solution, because I don't have a better one right now. But you can see the fundamental flaw that has come to life today, especially in Canada.
Right. And I think no matter the system, like, or whether it's a business, or even, again, whether you think about it as an athlete, if you don't understand the holes in your game, then you're leaving yourself majorly exposed, because you should at least be able to account for them. And that's one of these issues with democracy. Again, I'm not advocating for a different system, but I am saying if we don't understand the issues that this system has inherently, then they're able to be exploited to a much greater degree. Just like if you're an athlete, if you don't recognize that, let's say you have a habit of dropping your hand, like your left hand, when you throw your right, and if you don't acknowledge that that's a habit and that's an opening, then your opponent is only able to.
You're gonna get knocked the fuck out.
Yeah, yeah. Your opponent is only able to take advantage of it to a greater degree.
Yes.
All right, moving on to our last story. We've got Alberta separation now a bigger threat than Quebec. For the first time in Canadian history, more citizens are concerned about Alberta leaving Confederation than Quebec. A Ledger poll shows 52% of Canadians believe Alberta's separation threat should be taken seriously, compared to 42% for Quebec. Frustrated by federal overreach, equalization payments, and economic stagnation, Albertans are losing faith in national unity under Prime Minister Mark Carney. A staggering 63% of Albertans and a growing number across the country, especially conservative voters, believe separation may be justified. Once dismissed as fringe sentiment, Alberta's secessionist movement is gaining legitimacy nationwide, revealing a federation dangerously close to fracturing. So, what would a successful referendum on Alberta separation mean for Canada's future?
Well, I mean, it'd be a significant blow to unity and identity of the country, of course. But I also believe that once the one province falls, once the first domino falls, more will come after it for sure. But most significantly would be the economic damage, right? That would be the biggest problem here for Canada. So Alberta is responsible for between 15 and 17% of Canada's GDP, so around $400 to $500 billion a year. You wipe that off. Now, you don't see a direct hit to your GDP at 15 to 17% because there are ways to recover and replace, but you'd see a drop of about 6.6%. So this is more than double the 2008 crash at 2.8%. So this would be very, very significant. There's also the issue that you're going to have of, energy. So now once you don't have Alberta in your back pocket because it's not part of Canada anymore, you need to buy energy from them. So costs are going to go up significantly, especially for places like Ontario and Quebec, which leverage a lot from Alberta, which I think is responsible for producing 70% of our oil and gas. So you see that as a bit of a problem. Then there's also the issue of how do you get to BC? Like there's going to be some border issues. There's going to be some tariff issues that are going to come into place as well. And like I said, Saskatchewan, I was saying that there were other provinces. Saskatchewan and Alberta both did polling pre-election. Alberta, pre-election, 30% of Albertans would vote for secession. Saskatchewan, 33% would actually vote for secession. So I think that they would come as a package deal. You know what I mean? And what are they going to do? Well, they're not going to be sovereign. They're going to be part of the United States. That's so obvious, right? Otherwise, they're going to have to create a currency. It'd be a whole issue. So I think that they would just jump into bed with the U.S. I think that would make the most sense. And I'd be willing to bet that even though this would be economically terrible for Quebec, I think if Saskatchewan and Alberta seceded, I think Quebec would jump in line too. They'd be like, well, the ship is sinking. I'm out of here. I don't know what Canada will look like after that. However, I still believe that it's a bigger lift than public sentiment. Someone had said on our video, one of the videos that I did, they went off on a long tangent, like, oh, you're wrong, Jonathan, because of X, Y, and Z, blah, blah. Actually, I'm not wrong. I wasn't wrong. The rules in place, here's the only loophole that the federal government actually has. There is language that says there has to be a clear majority on a clear question. That's the loophole that the federal government has to leverage to try to stop Alberta from seceding. But if they vote for it, they have to negotiate in good faith. So will it actually come to fruition? Maybe, maybe not, because there's some vague language in place. But I think if the public will is strong enough, I think it will be difficult for them to not eventually get to that point. Now, this gets to sort of the darker side of their secession. That is from a legitimate legal administrative perspective. Now, if I'm the federal government of Canada, how do I possibly let Alberta, Saskatchewan, and maybe Quebec leave? Because I lose my power, I lose my economic engine. The country basically falls apart. So I'm of the opinion that even if the legal pathway is available and the public sentiment makes it possible, even if that's there, I believe you're going to see some pretty dirty tricks from the federal government to make sure it doesn't happen. This could come in the form of, and I'm not advocating for any of this. This is just what I see. This could come in the form of corruption. It could come in the form of bribery. It could come in the form of, oops, people start dying. Mm-hmm. Because the thing is, if you risk losing, like, people have died for a lot less than $400 to $500 billion worth of GDP every year, for sure. And if you start losing the opportunity to, think about the Euromaidan over in Ukraine, right? So America wants to install a pro-Western government. They overthrow the president there. Now you've got this situation where, okay, well, now you've got a pro-West government in Ukraine. We've seen what's happened. But anyway, that's how that plays out. Why is it crazy to think that you're going to see the same thing in Alberta or Saskatchewan or anything like that? And maybe it plays out a little different, obviously, because we're one nation, not fighting. You know what I mean? But you may see something like that unfold where people just, you know what? I'll try to be more positive. Maybe they go to Danielle Smith and go, hey, here's your opportunity, Danielle Smith. You want to lead the country? You think you've got a better solution? How about you lead the Conservative Party and we will have an election? And if you win the election, you can run the country your way. Maybe that's an option they take. And then they just manipulate the election and win anyway. And then Danielle Smith is out of power. And now they've got a pro-Canada premier in Alberta. These are all just theories. None of this. I can't back any of this up. I'm just looking at the components and guessing how this plays out, because I just don't think that the federal government can afford to lose its economic engine. And with that, the other provinces that would probably fall in line.
Well, I think a big factor in all of this is going to be how the federal government responds to Alberta and Danielle Smith's essentially Alberta Accord, where she said that she wants to renegotiate the province's role in Confederation and demands to include more pipelines, elimination of net zero mandates, and equal transfers or equal treatment in federal transfers. So she's essentially given them an ultimatum. And I think depending how the federal government reacts to that is going to make a big change in whether this separation actually becomes a very legitimate threat or not. I think if Ottawa essentially goes, okay, yep, we'll respect you and respect your demands and your wishes. And like, this is what's so crazy to me is that, especially when it comes to Quebec has such a stronghold over, or has at least for historically, over our federal government. Like, their demands all the time, both conservative and liberal parties throughout history have pandered to Quebec in major ways. Which is so
weird, because what do they offer?
But then they essentially just say, screw you to Alberta. Like, there's zero respect given to Alberta in that sense. So depending whether that sentiment changes and they go, okay, we will actually respect you as a critical piece of Canada, then I think the separation talks will quiet down a lot. But I think if the Mark Carney and the Liberals continue on and say essentially, yeah, we hear what you're saying, but we don't care, then I think you're going to see those talks really start to ramp up. And to your point, once one domino falls, I do think multiple do. Although what's interesting, especially in the case of Alberta, is because I don't see Quebec separating and pushing for. I would see them wanting to become their own nation. I wouldn't see them at all being like, "Oh, we want to become a part of America."
No, they're more likely to try to join France. Like, this just right. I don't think the French don't even like them, so I don't know how that plays out.
But with Alberta, it's very they would have no choice but to join America. They could not establish their own independent nation because they're landlocked too. 100%. Like, at that point, like, if you think it's tough getting pipelines built in exporting Albertan oil right now, good luck if you separate and you essentially don't have any representation. I mean, what little representation they actually already do have in Ottawa, but it would only become worse, their negotiating position within Canada. And so their only choice would be to become the states. In Quebec's case, they've got the St. Lawrence River. You know, they're not as resource rich as Alberta. They don't have as much to lean on. Like, I mean, they've got dairy, but they don't have as much to lean on economically to sustain themselves. But yeah, they do have the St. Lawrence River, which would at least give them access to the international markets without having to rely on other Canadian provinces to import and export, or at least help them with that process.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're equally fucked in different ways. Is kind of how I see it, because like Quebec's got they're the largest receiver of equalization payments. They have no economy. You know, like sure they may have access in and out, but they can't survive on their own. They'd have to create their own currency. It'd be a tariff issue, a border issue. I think that's an untenable situation. I think that's one of the biggest reasons that Quebec would struggle with separation. And like you said, in Alberta, they got no choice but to join the U.S. because they're stuck. But I think like who wouldn't want an extra $400 to $500 billion a year in your GDP plus more when you let them leverage it? You could probably, I don't know if you could double that, but arguably you could double that number. So like, yeah, I mean, Trump would be knocking on the door right away. Let's go, you know, and he'd make it worth it for them. You know, I think that they would thrive. Oddly enough, I think a lot of Canadians in other parts of the country would migrate there very, very quickly.
Oh, I would 100%. If we can't make the American move happen, then there's a good chance that I'll be thinking about Alberta for that.
Yeah, no, and I agree. I mean, so far it's the safest place, like a safest place. I'm not trying to be hyperbolic, but like it's the best location for people like us right now in the country. A little cold, if I'm being honest, but otherwise, and if it does go in that direction, I mean, yeah, I think you'd see the population of Alberta triple. I think you'd see it literally. I think they would have a massive infrastructure problem, because I literally think it would triple in 6 months to a year.
Yeah, for sure. And two, I do look at, say, the Alberta becoming part of America. You go, it's hard for me to imagine any scenario where staying a part of Canada benefits them more than becoming part of America. Like it really doesn't. You're now part of a stronger military.
Yes,
you have somebody that actually wants to use your resources and expand those industries, and also the tax structure. You're going to and yeah, you have more leverage. Like I don't. You wouldn't be part of a government that just completely disrespects you, which they currently do. So, anything else you wanted to add today, brother?
No, that is everything.
All right, before we get out of here, don't forget to head over to our Substack, where you can sign up for our newsletter, which goes out 5 days a week. That's blendrnews.substack.com, BLENDR news.substack.com. You can also find the link in the description below. And you can head over to blendrnews.com to pick up a Death by Taxes hoodie if you would like to support the show. Thank you for watching, and we'll catch you next week.
Bye, everybody.